your talk on data contracts. Yeah. Tarunima needs no introduction.
No,
Thank
you
you.
are absolutely right. Should I just introduce myself
Yes,
so
you
that
could.
you're free to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Hi everyone. So my name is Tarunima. I do research at an organization called Tattle. We are a civic tech organization. We're primarily open source, and we build tools, data sets. Okay, we build tools and data sets. Is that recording? Yeah. Okay, we build tools and data sets. To respond to online harms, and we focus primarily on Indian languages. So, tools and data sets could be scrapers, and in terms of machine learning work, we have two machine learning products that we've developed so far. One is a configurable engine for analysis of multilingual and multimodal content, which is called Feluda. You can check it out on GitHub. And then the other project, which is what I will drill into a little bit more today, is the UDI project. And that is a module for detecting and mitigating online gender-based violence, so misogyny in Indian languages. And then we've, over the last 5 years, collected a bunch of different data sets relevant to fact-checking sites in India, annotated data sets on memes, and also on misogyny and explicit language in Tamil, Hindi, and Indian English. So the talk today is about rethinking data contracts for openness in AI. So just in this talk so far, we did mention open source AI a couple of times, and this talk is actually going to drill deeper into what that term means and specifically look at the data piece. I'm going to do a quick poll. So I'm going to ask everyone a couple of questions, and we can do a show of hands, and let's keep it a little bit interactive. Have any of you built an AI application? Okay, great. Have any of you fine-tuned a model? Okay, great. Sorry. No, any model is fine. Yeah, you fine-tuned a model. Yeah, okay. Have you collected data for an AI application, right? So this could be scraped. You've scraped the public web. You've collected private data. So can you all just give me a sense of what kind of data you collected? Yeah.
So I was trying to build an application centered around women's safety.
Women's safety.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happens is, I'll give you some context and then I can.
Yeah.
So what happens is that a lot of organizations in Bangalore, when they send women back to their homes during night, they are accompanied by a driver, right? They send them gas and stuff, right? So one of the problems that what happens in between things, anything happens, right? So what we were trying to build was that there would be a camera inside the car itself,
Yeah.
right? And from the point of origin to the point of destination, we will send alerts on certain events. For example, let's say somebody gets in after the ride starts, right? Right, in between. That scenario is rare, but it can happen, right?
Yeah.
So for that, we wanted data. So we specifically went on drives in the car itself, and we recorded all of those things, modified it to frames, and then we used analytics to train it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Yeah.
Social media data, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, LinkedIn, Twitter,
Yeah.
a lot of them. Basically trying to train geo-engineering conspiracy theorists around the world and trying to fight it. This was a project for University of Texas.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
So I was looking at the vendor contracts for a typical large enterprise company. There are a lot of contracts, and
Yeah.
usually people don't look at them because they are important or in your day-to-day invoicing.
Yeah.
For example, your contract would have ended, but your vendor is still raising your invoices. So a lot of data, all of that data stays into PDFs, long PDFs. So we were trying to build an application where all your contract data could be summarized and made use of in your day-to-day. So that's when a lot of data collection was necessary in terms of multiple contract formats and.
Got it. It seems like both of you did it in like an industry context. The data was proprietary, was bound by NDAs, all of that, right? You did it in a university context. Anyone else who did it for a research project considered? Yeah.
For my thesis, I collected developer data.
Yeah.
So what are they talking about within each community and also their contribution patterns and
Okay.
their profile and their readme and everything.
Yeah.
And I tried to figure out who's more likely to be popular, who's more likely to be sponsored, who's.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. I did see another hand there, but I'll just move on to the next one. So for the three of you, four of you who used collected academic data or collected in the research setting, what did you do with your data? Did you publish it? Is it on your desktop? Like, where is that data right now?
It's currently hosted on MongoDB.
Okay.
So the project is currently not live. So we are training on data. The end goal is to built NLPs on that data.
Got it. Do you know what you're going to do with the data eventually? Do you have a policy for the data eventually?
So we have plans to publish that data, but the University of Texas is in talks. Like, how are we going to do that?
Got it. Got it. Where is your data?
It's on a server in Ahmedabad.
Okay.
So I don't have a plan for the data yet because
Okay.
the research is still being published.
Got it.
After a point, I would want to create something, some dump on Zenodo or something to
Okay.
allow reproducibility of the results.
Great. Do you have where does your data live? Where is it? No, you had raised your hand and said you have. Yes.
So I participated in India hackathon,
Yeah.
wherein the data was cybercrime, the actual cybercrime data of India,
Yeah.
hate against women. That data is quite kind of public.
Yeah.
But I did kind of immediately process it, mask it. I have, I think, uploaded on Canvas.
Okay. Great. Okay. So yeah, I think we'll come back to like the way you all have hosted data. I think with the ones who are in industry, it's going to be a more complicated conversation. But what I'll say is that we have this conception of AI, which is that you add data to code and you get AI. But my position is it's a little bit more like this. If anyone remembers Powerpuff Girls, right, where it would say sugar and spice and everything nice, and then Professor Utonium would. I feel like there's a generational gap here. Like there are a couple of folks who have no idea what this is about. So there's Professor Utonium who will do like some stirring, and then voila, you have like Powerpuff Girls, right? But the point being that, and then when you have Powerpuff Girls, you can't really go back and figure out what was sugar, what was spice, right? The point being that it's not as simple as just like data plus code is equal to AI, right? Like it's actually it's far more complicated than that. So over the last 2 years, there's been a fair bit of conversation on what is openness in AI, right? So these are tables from 2 separate papers. If you look at the paper on the left, so this is a chart that's describing what the tech stack looks like, right? So they're saying that there is the model components, which is where a lot of emphasis goes, where we talk about the data sets, the code, and the model weights, right? Then there is the product UX side, which we can leave for now. And then there's also, like say, the infrastructure, which is the hardware, firmware, right? Like that's also where we're talking about supply chain semiconductors. And then there's also the attributes, which is like documentation, which is if someone had to reproduce your entire AI pipeline, what would it take for them to do it, right? So if you just had the model components in place, maybe they would get 80% of the way. But if you were trying to really get them to reproduce your work, you would pay attention to all the attributes as well. You would pay attention to the documentation, you would pay attention to actually now the licensing, and that's partly where we will drill into. There's a separate paper that actually talks about different gradations or different forms of open source, right? So there is a very maximal open science approach, which is where, where, like I said, you have to pay attention to all of the things on the left, and then you have maximal reproducibility. But then you also have like open tooling and open models. So a lot of us might have actually used Llama or DeepSeek, right? Like a lot of these models that won't comply with all of the, like they don't have every bit of that bit on the left side public or open, but it's still usable, and it's still to some extent, they have open weights, so we can adapt it for our applications, as opposed to say something like ChatGPT or the open AI APIs, which are where the weights are also not public, right? So all you do is you get an API, you put it into your application, and there's sort of limited adaptation that you can do to the open AI models. Despite like the complexity of what open source or openness in AI means, the Open Source Initiative, which is also the organization that actually came up with the open source software license, right? So we all now know, for example, MIT is a open source, is a OSS compliant license, right? GPL is an open source compliant license. So that OSI is the organization that maintains and actually has the definition of the 4 freedoms, right? And so they, regardless of the complexity, did try to come up with an open source AI definition, which people have had some form of criticism too. But where the most criticism has come is actually at the data piece, right? So the code and the parameters piece is somewhat clear. People are like, what they've said is your complete source code should be open. So the complete source code used to train and run the system is open, and also the model weights and parameters, that is open. But on data information, they said that if you have sufficiently detailed information about how you created the data, you don't have to release your data, but you have to give sufficient information on how you created the data, that can qualify for your model to be an open source AI model. Okay, and now obviously the moment you get into this data information piece, there is so much like flexibility on how you interpret it, right? Because in the applications that both of you mentioned, which are like industry applications, you might build an amazing model, right? But you probably can't release the data, right? Because of like all sorts of privacy concerns. But then you might still want to claim that you are an open source model because you've say released your weights and you want someone to be able to like tweak, etc. Right? So that's where a lot of the complexity is coming, and there's a lot of fighting happening on, can you say something is open, or what level of information on the data qualifies to call something open source AI? And as was mentioned in the previous talk, this is actually also like a geopolitical concern, right? So when China says DeepSeek was an open source AI model, the US government's position at the time was not very pro open weights. And then Trump actually very recently said, no, our position is also going to be that we are going to be an open weights model. But the conversation on data is still like murky. Okay, so this is what I want to start with, which is like data doesn't work in the same way as software works in, right? Many of us, because we collect data, right, when we're doing our coding projects, we begin to think of it as all the same, right? We think like data is a part of the coding pipeline, and therefore data is exactly the same as software. And the whole premise of this presentation is that data is not equal to software. Okay. So there are lots of reasons to open data, right? So all the people in academia have said that they want to open data for transparency, reproducibility. There are also reasons around efficiency and environmental sustainability, which is that collecting data is an expensive process. If one group has collected that data, to keep doing that again and again, like especially if you're doing like population scale, like, very large scale data collection, you're basically like, it's efficient to open that data rather than repeat that exercise. But then there are all these reasons to not open data that we heard from this side, which is that you have personally identifiable information. There are legal considerations and ethical considerations. The other side of it is that there are uneven benefits to big tech, or and those. So basically, when groups create data, often the biggest users of all open data sets are actually the big tech companies right now, right? So your Googles and your Metas and all of them that have the compute to train models will use that data to train the model, whereas a lot of the smaller groups that are creating that data don't have the capability, the tech resources to actually do much with it, right? So it lands up being uneven benefits to the fairly high resource who might be located in other countries, right? Like it lands up being uneven benefits to them. And then the third point is, which is like the openness of data can actually sometimes reduce the utility of the AI model. And that's the use case I'm going to come to, which is from our work. So this is a project called UDI, which we started in 2021. And where we were coming from was that people of marginalized genders in India are targeted online, which leads them to recede from online spaces. But moderation and safety tools for users of Indian languages remain insufficient, right? So basically, if you look at any social media platform, moderation works far better in English, but works far poorly in any Indian language because the companies have not trained on that data. So what we did was that we actually created a machine learning model, and we had 24,000 tweets that were annotated by activists, researchers, academics in India, and in 3 languages, right? So 6,000 tweets in Tamil, 8,000 in Tamil, 8,000 in English, and 8,000 in Hindi. And then we fine-tuned a Roberta model and hosted it on Hugging Face. So this is what our pipeline looks like, right? Which is that the data, and we also created a list of slur words, which is also something that we can use in the machine learning pipeline if we want. All of this data is licensed under an open database license. It's published as a paper and it's hosted on GitHub. The model was hosted on Hugging Face, and the code is also on GitHub, licensed under a GPL 3.0. GPL 3.0 means that anyone can use the code as long as they also publish their code under a GPL 3.0, which means that it actually restricts the use of the code for commercial purposes, right? That's what sort of GPL means. Now, what happens with specifically like the UDI data is that it has instances of abuse, which is that words that are used to target marginalized genders in India, and it has some metadata associated with it. And we also have tweets. In future, we would like to do the same thing with images and videos because currently the moderation system works only on text. But what are the implications of having opened this data for abuse prevention? So the thing is that if the data is that, for example, the slur words or like the original data set is used for detection of abuse, but everyone knows that this is the data around which moderation happens, they're going to change their behavior. And this is typically what happens with online social media moderation, right? So for example, when Indian Twitter realized that the words Hindu and Muslim, just the religious identifiers, were more likely to get picked up by Twitter's, this was when Twitter was Twitter, not X, by Twitter's moderation algorithms, they started using the letters H and M, right? So the more transparency you have on some of these data sets, they basically start moving around or they stop using, or so the utility of like that model just reduces because people know exactly how you're going to pick on their data. The other bit is that there are implications for sustainability. So what we have encountered is that now that this data exists, right, a lot of platforms, which are social media platforms, AI companies, etc., they want to use the data. But if you go to them and say, will you pay for creating this data? They will say no, right? So this is like the tragedy of the commons, like the sustainability issue, which is that it's important, but not important enough that you want to put money behind it, right? Also because spending money on some of this work, right, it doesn't kind of hit their profit margins directly, right? So that's the issue we'll end up dealing with. So these are like, so this is like the spectrum of what can happen with data, right? Like all data is open for all use cases, that is commercial or not. That's like your maximally open data sets. And the other is that all data is closed for all use cases, commercial or not, right? And we kind of have to be somewhere in between. So currently all of our data is open for all use cases, commercial or not. But as we think of the future of the project, we need to think of, you know, all the issues that I mentioned so far. And these are like two models that we've thought of, right? One is differential access by purpose and the other is differential access by time. So differential access by purpose would mean that, that you draw a distinction, which is that if there's someone who wants it for academic research, government, non-profit, you know, sort of social good initiatives, you share the data with them. But for anyone who wants it for commercial purposes, you don't. But this is actually, if you think about it, a fairly hard model to implement because you're making a subjective call every time on whether is this purpose like social good or not, right? And then what happens for the machine learning model is that for the people who have access to the data who are in the social good use cases, it becomes a fully sort of downloadable, open, reproducible model. But actually, it wouldn't like really align with the principles of open source licenses because you're not supposed to place restrictions of this kind, right? Like in the sense, when you put out a code in a GPL license, you're saying that you can use this code as long as it's non-commercial, right? But that decision and that liability lies on the person who's using the code. I don't put a restriction saying that I will only share the code if you come and tell me that it is non-commercial. You see the distinction? Whereas here with data, what we're saying is, oh, we will only share it with you. We will keep it with us. We will only share it with you if you prove to us that you're a social good use case. The other model that you can think of is differential data access by time, which is that the recent data is available at a cost, regardless of whether it's a social good use case or a commercial use case, but older data is free, right? So now in our world, in our use case of moderation and abuse detection, new data does become relevant, right? Because social media coded language changes very quickly. And so for platforms like the older data, like your slurs, galis that have been going around for like 50 years, we probably, you know, that's stable. It's like the coded language. Coded languages where people use different words to refer to a community, right? So for example, penguin is used to refer to women in burqas, or, you know, you can think of all sorts of other newer words, right? So those are the kind of words that become a little bit more timely for some of these platforms for commercial usage. So we say, okay, like if anything that's new, that is paid and all the older data is free. And then what happens for the machine learning model is that it's maximally open, right? So everyone gets uniform access to the older data, and that model is maximally open for the older data. And at least a version of the model will qualify as open source and possibly will align with the DPG standard, which I actually won't go into right now. Okay, so I wanted to quickly turn this to you. What is your feedback on these two options that I presented? Like, can you give me a pros and cons, and like which one seems better to you?
Sharing of data.
Yeah, so I just presented two options, right?
One is like proactively convincing you that you want using it.
Yeah, so yeah, one is we open the data and share it on a use case by use case basis. The other is everything that is old is open, but everything that is new is paid for everybody, whether it's you're a non-profit, whether you're
And that might be argumentative, but when you say that something is old, something is new, it changes every 1 2 years, right? So who decides that benchmark?
yeah. I mean, okay, let's just yeah. I'm saying let's put that arbitrary benchmark at like 2 years. 2 years. Everything that's older than 2 years is open, but all the data that's new.
One more perspective, like, let's say you search a word, any word on the word, right? It will give you a graph. In 1800, it used to be used a lot, right? And now it is used very less, right? It gives you a graph property. Now when you say 2 years, but from your perspective, 2 years, but from maybe some other perspective, they might say, maybe this is used such so common, right? So, like,
Yeah.
it comes to the fact
Yeah,
that it is always open to interpretation, right?
Sure, it is. Any other takes on how we should? Yeah.
So if I come at it from a purely academic perspective, I see the value in using the time-based approach because if you are studying language, that would be enough for us. I think 3 years of data would be enough to see how people moderate themselves and self-correct themselves in different social settings.
Got it.
But that's being said, like if it's not too much of overhead on your part to see, then maybe you could extend that differential access of even those 2 years if an academic asks for it.
So you're doing a combination of both. I see. Okay. More work for us. Got it. Anyone else? Yeah.
It's also like depends on, like, for example, most of the are using it for developing the product, right?
Uh-huh.
Deadline I get.
Okay. Yeah.
I get deadline for 3 months. I get a deadline for 2 months.
Yeah.
I get a deadline for a year. Right? Based on that, because some cost might also be involved. Right? So
Yeah.
you again.
You're thinking from your. I'm saying, give me advice as the data like provider. What should I do? Yeah.
If it's purpose-based, I guess how we decide whether our purpose is good or bad, right? That becomes a very subjective and
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Because one purpose could be good for someone,
Yeah.
could be bad for someone else.
Yeah.
How do we
Decide. Yeah.
I think like the second one is better because first one leads to a lot of subjectivity
Yeah.
and the second one is more objective. So
Yeah.
I am more of the opinion of let's keep things equal for everybody.
Yeah.
So I would go with
The second one.
second one just because
Okay.
of the objectivity. Otherwise, people would be like, oh, is this purpose good for them?
Yeah.
Is the committee deciding what is good and bad?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think this is yes. Please. No. There's enough time.
The advantage would be differential
Yeah.
time-based option is that let's say you have some data like the riots, right? And so people who study like the whole mechanism of how riots are generated and how so if you have social media data on your data, that's something that needs to be sort of studied or managed much more carefully. So you can say, we sort of only release it after we have sort of either anonymized or taken much more legal care, other types of care, and then take a little more time. If there's more sort of generic social data, you can sort of be more fluid and say, okay, we'll release it after 6 months because we are trying to study faster trends and so on. So that can be adjusted over time, and whatever needs to be strictly, anonymized, that can be done. So that's like if you take the time to be more careful with certain types of data,
Yeah.
more easy going with other types of data. So you can sort of
Yeah, it's interesting because you're looking at time not so much as the utility of the data as much as like what does it take to release it carefully, right? That's also an interesting, that's also an important consideration. Okay, so we haven't yet decided. We haven't yet decided what model we will go with. Something we want to do is actually take this question back to the groups we work with. Yeah.
The thing is, in the second option, right, differential access of your time. So how will you prove that the model is trained only using the old data? Do you have any tool specific in the mind, or is it yet to be decided?
I didn't understand the question.
You can skip some of the old data, right?
Skip.
Yeah, like if you are completely listing the old data, then how do we ensure that the model trained is only using the old data and you didn't skip any other data?
I'm not fully sure what will happen in the differential access by time is that Tattle will actually have the bleeding edge model because we will have the latest data. But the model that is hosted or downloadable will be an older model, right?
The question that he asked is asking is like older data that is older
Yeah.
than, say, the period of time that
There's newer data, yeah.
newer data,
Yeah.
right? So anyways, when you are training on the older data, you're doing quite a bit of work,
Yeah.
right? In
Yeah.
comparison to like the cost of it,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
this is free. You're still doing enough work. This is costly. Like sorry, this is you're giving it for money, but still you are doing slightly more work than like
So the marginal cost of getting newer data is lesser, right?
for you.
Yeah. Yeah. But so you're saying that are we giving too much to the big players by having released an open data or like older data? Is that the claim?
Yeah.
No,
Probably what
is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is actually, let's say you use 100 images to train. I mean, if your old data is 100 images, right, and you don't want to recreate 10 of those images, due to some ethical concerns or whatever,
Yeah.
right, because of your principles,
Yeah.
right? Then how do you ensure that your model is trained only on the 93 data, but
Now-
not 100 data? Like that
Right.
needs to
So
be-
you're saying that because we now have this caveat and we're saying some of the newer data is not going to be released, how can someone hold me to that I actually have released all the older data, right? Like you're saying, have you? Yeah. 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 I think the way that would go is that ultimately we are releasing the model. So if let's say you are releasing the model on Hugging Face, you're going to release like you can see the performance, right? And if the older data and I mean obviously auditability of models is complex, but in theory someone can do exactly what we have done and they should get the same results that we are getting, right? So see, obviously we are saying that the model that we have internally is different from the model that we have shared on Hugging Face, right? But the model we have shared on Hugging Face with the older data should be the same. The result should be the same for everybody. So that's how you check that we have held true to the older data claim.
The thing is, there isn't a tool to that actually currently. Like, no, there isn't a tool to check, to reverse engineer that all this data is used.
But you could basically go through this entire. Okay, so if I have released all of the tech stack attributes, all of that is public with older data, then everyone should be. You don't have to reverse engineer. You just have to redo everything, and you will get the same results.
And we can benchmark with some queries, only we can do that, right? Apart from that.
No, I'm saying you can recreate the model from scratch. You can do exactly what we did and just recreate the model from scratch.
Okay, you're saying that
You don't need to reverse engineer if you have the older
you're
data.
saying that the compliance team, whoever is taking care of the compliance process, they just have to recreate
Create the entire thing, right? That's how you make sure that like we have actually shared everything. I mean, there's.
I was not aware that you were also going to share that as well. You were only focused on the fact that you were only going to release the data.
No. So I'm saying in all of this, the code and the parameters are open, right? Like we are saying that all of the complexity is on the data side. We've opened the code. So when I was saying this, we have shared the model is all of this is open. The code is open, right? All of the complexity is around the data piece. And that is actually true for most of us. All of our complexity is going to be around the data piece, not so much around the model and the code, because most of us are going to be fine-tuning existing foundational models. Ye- Right. Right. Yeah. I'm saying even as industry players and academic players, most of us will be quite okay sharing our code and our model, right? All of us are actually going to get stuck on the data piece. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like I was saying, we haven't decided on which version, which way we will go. We want to take this back to the communities we've created the data with and see what licensing regimes, etc., work for them. But that was just a case study to help you think through like the issue of data governance. What happens with private data? So this is the two industry folks. The second industry person is left. But what happens with private data?
We are still figuring it out. Right now, it's only Google Drives.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, the thing we're doing is pretty sensitive when it comes to women issues, right?
Yeah.
So we also, let's say, need women in the cars to train it on. And we build the product for 3 months and we were not able to get a single result. Right? Because we were very hesitant as to how to approach women that we want to figure a car and
Yeah.
we work from our perspective and want to train that data, right?
Yeah.
Right now we only did it on the male data. Right? And for women, we're just figuring out okay, what happens to this data, how do we.
Right.
At the same time, we want to, and forgetting the number, we want to encrypt it and store it, not just store it like
Right.
the way we do it, and plus homophobic encryption, in the sense that
Right.
when somebody even searches our data, we want it to be encrypted only.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want even the developers to have access to it.
Right. Yeah. So I think one of the things that is happening in a lot of organizations is that we're all working with private data. A lot of actual use cases of ML, AI are going to be with private data. And so this is a company called OpenMind, which is, their claim is that currently AI is trained on less than 0.1% of the world's data because most of the data is private data, right? So this is a company that's trying to, it's a non-profit, sorry, it's a non-profit that's saying that they're trying to access non-public data, which is blocked by privacy, security, legal and intellectual property concerns. I don't understand the tech of this, maybe someone else does, but just trying to let you know that, yeah, like the whole data piece with AI is actually pretty complex, and there are both technical and like social issues to solve with it. Now I'm going to come to, this is the last slide, which is on sovereignty and open data, right? So one of the things that's happened with English is that a lot of English foundational models have been trained on data that was already on the internet, right? So what happened was a lot of people were blogging, writing things on websites like in the 90s, 2000s. I don't think anyone at the time, or not anyone, but most people did not anticipate that all of this content was going to, at some day, feed into a foundational model, right? But the thing is that data already existed, and then all of that has now fed into the foundational models. But what's happening for a lot of other languages, which is including Indian languages, is that the data doesn't exist, right? So now we know that foundational models or large language models and AI is possible. So we're explicitly going and collecting data to create these models, right? And that changes something about about how you think of that data. Because in the earlier case, when people were blogging, writing on websites, they were already getting something from what they had written, right? They were probably getting views, they were getting social capital, they were probably getting money from ads, right? But now when we are going and collecting data because, oh, like there isn't enough language data for Tamil, etc., we haven't really thought through the reciprocity there, right? So this is an interesting example from New Zealand, which is so Maori is a tribe, and the Maori speech, it's a very small, very few number of people living in New Zealand who identify as Maori. And so they started a radio station in 1990, and they basically had 30 years worth of content. In 2013, they said, we wanted this content to be available on the internet, but they did not host it on a YouTube or any of the prominent platforms because they said, we want control over the distribution mechanism. So they created their own content distribution system. And now they have trained an AI model around it, but they've crowdsourced the data under, and when they were training the AI model, they realized they didn't actually have enough language. So then or enough data. So they went to their community members and said, give us more of your data, right? But they crowdsourced the data under this license called the Kaite Kitinga license. I'm going to butcher this. But basically what this license says is that this data is collected from the Maori people, but it is only used for the benefit of Maori people, right? So they don't share this data with most corporations because they again think that all of this data is more likely to benefit the corporations than it is to benefit the Maori people, right? And this is again an interesting thing because this does not comply with your open database licenses, right? Like we're now in this terrain where we're talking of sovereign AI, but it is not sort of like the version of open source AI that we would all like to believe, which is all open data, open code, open parameters. Okay, so to wrap the whole thing up, which is that when you are building your AI applications, your data is not, don't think of your data in the same way you think of your software, right? Data always comes from somewhere and someone, and that means that the governance becomes a social process, right? So like right now when we were describing, of course, there are technical methods as well, but it is also a social process, which this license proves pretty well, right? You have to think about who are the people from whom you're collecting the data, and therefore, who are like the stewards of data, who gets to decide the license on the data, right? All of that is a social process, and it's not something that you should shy away from. The second big thing, which I think often open source communities sometimes forget, is that there is clear reciprocity in open source software, right? It's not like we just create free software because it's like free, like we're not doing this without getting anything in return, right? We absolutely get something in return. It helps us with our upskilling, it helps us with maybe getting jobs in the future. That doesn't happen with data. Like if you go and collect data from someone, what does the person who has given you data, what do they get for their future life, right? And therefore, when you're thinking of crowdsourced data, think of that reciprocity, and compensation is a form of reciprocity, right? Like money is a form of reciprocity, but the moment you bring money into the equation, it becomes quite complicated because you get into this question of how do you value the data. I will not go into that. That's like a separate stream of work for us. And yeah, like I said, don't shy away from the complexity of managing and thinking about data governance. That's it for me. Thank you so much.